My brother's 40th birthday party was the kind of event my mother had been planning since February. Rented venue, caterers, a three-tier cake with fondant decorations she'd shown me pictures of at least 6 times. She'd even hired a photographer for a birthday party. Not a wedding, not a quinceañera, a Tuesday in July birthday party for a 40-year-old man who still called her every Sunday to complain about his landlord. I drove down from Portland for it, 8 hours. I took Friday off work, packed a bag, arranged for my neighbor to water my plants, and drove down to Medford because my mother asked me to, and because, despite everything, I still show up when my family needs me to show up. The party was at a rented hall off Riverside Avenue. White tablecloths, string lights, a slideshow of my brother cycling through on a screen near the bar. My uncle was already 3 drinks in when I arrived. My aunt had made her potato salad that nobody touches but everyone compliments. It smelled like every family gathering I've ever attended, which is to say it smelled like floral centerpieces and the particular anxiety of being around people who know exactly which buttons to press. My brother, I'll call him my brother because that's what he is, though some days the word feels like it costs me something, was holding court near the cake table, laughing with his college friends, backslapping, the easy confidence of a man who has never once questioned whether he belonged in a room. My mother found me near the appetizer table. "You made it," she said, and hugged me the way she hugs me, which is briefly and with one hand already pulling away. I said I would, I said. "Your brother's so happy," she told me. "He's really done well for himself." I nodded. I took a stuffed mushroom. I told myself I was going to get through this evening without incident. I almost did. About an hour in, my father clinked his glass. He's not a big speech guy. He always says he leaves the talking to my mother, so when he stood up, the room actually quieted quickly. People like when the quiet one speaks. It feels significant. He talked about my brother growing up. Little League. The time he fixed the engine on a '98 Civic when he was 19, and my father said that was the moment he knew his son was going to be all right. He talked about hard work. He talked about character. And then he said it. "What I'm most proud of," my father said, raising his glass, "is that this kid never once asked anyone for a handout. Everything he has, he built himself. Nobody gave him anything. Pure self-made. That's my son." The room applauded. My uncle whooped. My mother dabbed at her eye with a cocktail napkin. I was holding a glass of sparkling water. I set it down on the table in front of me very carefully, the way you set something down when your hands have gone a little cold. I waited until the applause faded. I waited until my father sat back down and my brother was hugging him and the photographer was capturing the moment. Then I said, to no one in particular and somehow to everyone within earshot, so I guess the $43,000 he doesn't know I know about just doesn't count. My cousin, who was standing next to me, turned her head so fast she almost spilled her drink. I picked up my sparkling water and took a sip. Let me back up, because none of this starts at a birthday party. It starts about 6 years ago, in a kitchen that smelled like burnt coffee and the particular desperation of someone who doesn't have a lot of options left. My brother called me on a Wednesday night. I was 27. I was living in a studio apartment in Portland, working as a project coordinator for a mid-sized construction firm, paying off my own student loans, driving a 10-year-old Subaru with a cracked dashboard and a heating system that worked about 60% of the time. I was not rich. I was not even comfortable, exactly. I was fine, steadily, carefully fine. He said he was in trouble. He'd started a business 2 years before, a landscape company he'd built up from almost nothing, which, credit where it's due, he actually had worked hard at, but he'd overextended. He'd taken on too many contracts, hired staff before the contracts were secured, bought equipment on credit. And then one big commercial client had pulled out last minute, citing budget cuts, and suddenly he was staring down a gap he couldn't bridge. "I need a loan," he said, "just to cover payroll this month and get through to the next contract cycle. I'll pay you back by fall." I asked how much. He said $8,000. I want to be precise about the feeling I had in that moment, because it matters. It wasn't generosity, exactly. It wasn't even purely love. It was more like recognition. I knew what it felt like to be one bad month away from something unraveling. I'd been there myself 2 years earlier, when a medical bill had wiped out my emergency fund and I'd spent 3 months eating rice and beans and calculating exactly how long I could float if something else went wrong. Nobody had helped me then, I'd figured it out alone. But he was my brother. And $8,000, while not nothing, was something I could technically do. "I can do 5, I said. "I don't have 8 liquid right now." "5 would save me," he said. I transferred $5,000 the next morning. I didn't tell my parents. He asked me not to. He said he didn't want them to worry, didn't want them to know the business had hit a rough patch. I understood that. I transferred the money and I didn't say a word. He paid me back 3 months later. The full $5,000, with a Venmo note that said, "You're a lifesaver, sis," and a pizza emoji. I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. The next spring he called again. This time it was the equipment loan. The interest rate had adjusted upward in a way he hadn't anticipated, and he was trying to refinance, but the bank needed 30 days, and he had a payment due in 2 weeks. Could I cover the payment? Just the one payment, $6,000. He'd wire it back the moment the refinance went through. $6,000. I said yes, because the first time had worked out, because he'd paid me back, because he was my brother and his business was real and his problem seemed solvable. He paid back 4 of the 6 within 6 weeks. Then said the remaining 2 would come after the next big contract paid out. I said okay. I didn't love it, but I said okay. 3 months after that, the remaining $2,000 quietly became a footnote. He stopped mentioning it. I stopped asking. I told myself it was fine. It was $2,000. It wasn't worth the discomfort of pushing him on it. That's how it starts, I think. That's how you end up 6 years later, with a number that doesn't feel real. Because there was a third time, and a fourth, and a fifth. There was the time his truck needed a transmission replacement, and without the truck, there was no business. $4,000, paid back partially, the remainder absorbed into the general fog of money I'd stopped tracking carefully. There was the time his wife, they got married in between all of this, a wedding I was a bridesmaid in, a dress I paid for myself and flew down from Portland to wear, had a difficult pregnancy with unexpected complications, and the insurance gaffe was $3,000 that they just didn't have that month. I didn't even hesitate on that one. That wasn't a loan so much as it was just me handing money to my family because a baby was coming and they needed help. There was the time he called and said the business was doing great, actually, but he wanted to expand, new equipment, second crew, bigger contracts, and the SBA loan he'd applied for had hit a snag, and if he could just have 8 months, with a little more liquidity, he could get to the next level. This is the last time I'll ever need to ask, he said. After this, we're set. I said yes to that one too. $12,000 transferred in 2 installments. He never paid back more than 6 of it. I am not stupid. I want to be clear about that. I am not someone who didn't notice what was happening. I noticed. I kept a spreadsheet, not because I'm obsessive, but because at some point the amounts got large enough that I needed to see the numbers clearly, or I was going to start lying to myself about them. Column A, date. Column B, amount transferred. Column C, seek amount returned. Column D, net. By last year, column D said negative $43,200. $43,000. I am 32 years old. I do not own a home yet, in part because my down payment savings took longer to build than they should have because of a series of transfers that happened over 6 years to a landscaping business in Southern Oregon. I'm not saying my brother is the only reason I don't own a home. I'm saying he's part of it. And I didn't tell my parents, not once, in 6 years. Every time he asked me to keep it between us, I did, because I was trying to protect his pride, because I didn't want family dinners to become a courtroom. Because I am, apparently, the kind of person who will absorb a $43,000 secret and smile through 6 years of Thanksgiving turkeys without saying a word. I should tell you about my relationship with my family because it's relevant. I am the older child by 4 years. I moved out at 18, went to college on scholarships and loans, moved to Portland at 23, and built a life that looked from the outside like exactly what my parents would have wanted. Good job. Stable, independent, didn't ask for anything. My brother stayed closer to home. Moved 30 minutes away from my parents, had dinner with them regularly, called my mother on Sunday nights. He was present in the way I couldn't be geographically and otherwise, and I understood that he got credit for that presence. I wasn't resentful of it. Presence matters. Proximity matters. But there is a particular exhaustion that comes from being the child who makes it look easy. When you don't ask for help, people stop offering it. When you figure things out on your own, people assume you always will. When you're reliable, really reliably reliable, the kind of reliable that means you show up on time and handle your problems and call when you say you'll call, people stop worrying about you. Which sounds like a compliment. It mostly isn't. My brother got worried about. My brother got checked on. My brother got the Sunday calls, the care packages, the how's the business going conversations that were warm and invested and full of the particular tenderness my parents reserve for someone they're a little scared for. Nobody was scared for me. I had made sure of that. And then my father stood up at that birthday party and told a room full of people that my brother had never asked anyone for anything, that he'd built everything himself, that he was pure self-made. I thought about my spreadsheet. I thought about column D. I picked up my sparkling water. My cousin grabbed my arm about 30 seconds after I said it. "What does that mean?" she whispered. "What $43,000? "Nothing," I said. "Forget it." But rooms don't forget things, said into microphone-level silence. My aunt had heard it. 2 of my brother's college friends had heard it. My mother, who has the hearing of someone who spent 30 years listening for children sneaking out of the house at midnight, had absolutely heard it. My brother crossed the room in about 15 seconds. "Hey," he said, and his voice was low and controlled and utterly familiar. It was the voice he used when he was about to manage a situation. "Can we talk outside?" "Sure," I said. We went outside. The parking lot of the rented hall off Riverside Avenue, string lights visible through the windows behind us, the faint sound of a Fleetwood Mac song someone had added to the playlist. "What are you doing?" he said. "I'm attending your birthday party," I said. "You know what I mean. Dad said you never asked anyone for a handout," I said. "That's not accurate." He looked at me for a long moment. I could see him calculating, not whether he'd done anything wrong, but how much damage control was required and in what direction. My brother is good at people. He always has been. He can read a room, read a conversation, figure out which version of himself is going to land best. It's not a bad quality in a person, except when the person he's trying to manage is you. "That was between us," he said finally. "You agreed to that." "I did," I said. "I kept your secret for 6 years, so why?" "Because he stood up in front of 40 people and said you never asked anyone for anything," I said. "And I've been the thing you asked from for 6 years, and nobody knows that, and apparently everybody should know something different." He was quiet. "I'm not trying to blow up your party," I said. "I'm not going to go back in there and make a scene. But I'm also not going to stand there and watch everyone applaud a story that isn't true without saying something." That's it. That's all I said. One sentence. "You could have talked to me after." "I've been talking to you after for 6 years," I said. "I kept talking to you after." And the number kept going up. He didn't have an answer for that, which was new, actually. Usually he has an answer for everything. I went back inside. I ate a piece of the fondant cake. I talked to my aunt about her garden, and my uncle about his retirement plans, and my cousin about her kids' soccer tournament. I did not bring up the $43,000 again. I did not cry in the bathroom. I drove back to my hotel at 10:30, sat on the edge of the bed, and opened the Notes app on my phone. I typed enough. I'm not a confrontational person by nature. I want to be honest about that because the next part of this might make me sound like I am. But I'm not. I don't like conflict. I've spent most of my adult life specifically engineering my circumstances to minimize the amount of conflict I have to navigate. I moved to Portland partly because the distance made certain conversations logistically impractical. That's not avoidance, I tell myself. That's management. But there's a difference between managing conflict and managing yourself out of your own life. And somewhere around column D crossing $40,000, those two things had started to blur. The week after the party, I made 3 phone calls. The first was to a financial advisor I'd seen twice before. I laid out the situation, the total amount, the informality of the arrangements, the absence of any signed documents or promissory notes, and asked her what my options were. She was careful and measured and did not tell me what to do, which I respected. She did tell me that in Oregon, informal personal loans between family members can sometimes be pursued in small claims or civil court if there's sufficient evidence of the transaction and the expectation of repayment, but that the absence of a written agreement complicates things considerably. She also told me that the emotional cost of pursuing it legally in terms of family relationships and my own time and energy was something only I could calculate. I thanked her and hung up. The second phone call was to my mother. I called her on a Sunday, which is when she's usually in her best mood, settled in with her coffee and the gardening shows she watches. I told her I wanted to talk about something, and I told her all of it. The first loan, the second, the spreadsheet, the total. The 6 years of keeping it quiet because he asked me to. She was silent for a long time. "He told me the business was doing well," she said finally. "The business is doing well," I said. "He's a genuinely hard worker. That's not the issue. Why didn't you say something earlier?" It was a reasonable question, and I didn't have a simple answer. I told her the truth, which was, because he asked me not to, and because I was raised in a family where loyalty means keeping things quiet, and because I thought it would work out, and because every time I thought about bringing it up, I imagined the conversation going badly, and then I didn't bring it up. I said it all out loud, and it sounded like exactly what it was, which was 6 years of making the smaller choice because the larger one felt too hard, she cried. Not loudly, not dramatically. My mother doesn't cry loudly or dramatically, but I could hear it in the pauses between her words. "I don't want to blow up the family," I said. "That's not what I'm doing." But Dad stood up at that party, and I felt invisible. I've been the one holding things together quietly for a long time, and I needed someone to know that. "I know that," she said. "Now you do," I said. The third phone call was to my brother. That one was shorter. I told him I'd talk to Mom. I told him I wasn't planning to pursue anything legally. I told him I also wasn't going to pretend anymore that the $43,000 didn't exist, and that if our parents ever asked me directly, I was going to tell them the truth. And I told him that the lending was done. Not out of anger, not as a punishment. I said that clearly, but because I needed to prioritize my own financial stability. And that meant the arrangement we'd had informally for 6 years was over. He was quiet for most of it. At the end, he said, "You know I'm grateful." "I do," I said. "And I also need you to know that grateful doesn't make the number go away." He said he'd pay me back. I told him I believed he intended to. I didn't say I believed he would because I didn't know if that was true, and I've stopped making promises on behalf of other people's intentions. Here's the part of the story where I'm supposed to tell you that my father apologized and my brother wrote me a check and everything resolved cleanly. That's not what happened. What happened was slower and quieter and more complicated, which is how things usually happen in real families. My father found out, my mother told him, because they don't keep things from each other, which is a quality I respect in them. About 2 weeks after the party, he called me. He was not a man who apologized easily, my father, but he was also not a man who didn't try. He said he hadn't known. He said that didn't make the speech right, even without knowing, because he should have known. He said, and this surprised me, "I think I've been easier on your brother than I've been on you. And I've told myself it was because you didn't need it. And I think that was an excuse." I sat with that for a moment. "Thank you for saying that," I said. "I mean it," he said. "I know," I said. "I believe you." It wasn't a grand reconciliation. It was one phone call, 15 minutes, two people trying to say something real across the gap that had been quietly widening for years without anyone naming it, but it was something. It counted. My brother started a repayment plan in September, a set amount, transferred on the first of each month, enough that he'll have repaid the full amount in just under 4 years. We drew up a basic written agreement this time. I found a template online. We both signed it, my cousin witnessed it. It's not legally airtight, I know, but it exists in writing now. It has both our names on it and a number in black ink. He hasn't missed a payment. We had Thanksgiving together in November. My mother made turkey and her cornbread stuffing and the cranberry sauce that comes out of a can, even though she claims it doesn't. My brother's wife brought her sweet potato casserole. My father sat at the head of the table and did not give a toast, because I think he was more careful with his words now. And careful men sometimes choose silence over risk. After dinner, while we were doing dishes, my brother stood next to me at the sink and said quietly, without looking at me, "I'm sorry. For all of it, for what it cost you, and for letting it go on so long, and for not saying this sooner." I kept washing the dish I was washing. "Okay," I said. "That's it," he said. "What else do you want me to say?" I said. He thought about it. "I don't know, something. I love you," I said. And I needed to hear that. And I'm glad it's out in the open. And now let's finish these dishes because Mom's gonna yell at us if they sit in the rack too long. He laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind that catches you off guard. We finished the dishes. I'm not going to tell you the $43,000 was worth it. I don't think it was, in any simple accounting. I don't think I would make the same choices again, without a written agreement, without a clear conversation about expectations, without protecting myself the way I now understand I had the right to protect myself. But I'm also not going to tell you I regret the impulse behind it. The impulse was love. Complicated, poorly bounded, excessively silent love, but love. And love is not nothing, even when it's done badly. What I regret is the invisibility. The way I made myself invisible so thoroughly, for so long, that my father could stand up and erase me from my own family's story without meaning to. The way I kept quiet until one sentence in a parking lot became the loudest thing I'd said in 6 years. I don't live invisibly anymore. It's an ongoing project. It requires more effort than I expected, more discomfort, more saying things out loud before I've decided whether they're polished enough to say. But I'm doing it. I still drive down to Medford when my family needs me. I still show up when I say I will. But I show up differently now. I take up space at the table. I ask for things when I need them. I let people worry about me sometimes. It turns out that the people who love you, the real ones, don't actually want you to make yourself invisible. They just didn't know you were doing it. My mother calls me on Sunday now, too. It's a small thing. It's not nothing.